In this lesson, we'll take a look at how we can use a viewport canvas to paint interactively on our 3D models. So let's use the cockpit as an example, and let's say that we'd like to paint a texture map on this, so interactively here in the viewport. So we can do that here in 3ds Max 2011 with the viewport canvas. And this has existed before, but this version is really robust and is going to provide a lot of functionality as far as painting goes. So let's go ahead and get started here. I'm just going to isolate this, and I want to just get a temporary material on here just so we can see this a little bit better. And so I'm going to go ahead and go into here, and let's just sample this. Here is our multi-subobject material. Let's drop in a new standard material, and I'm just going to apply this here. And so right now you can see there are no maps associated with this. So what we want to do now is start our viewport canvas. So we'll go to Tools, Viewport Canvas, and now I'm just going to dock this over here to the side. And so now you can see, and you'll probably recognize a number of these different icons up here. These are going to be a lot of our tools that we're going to be using, or that we can use. We've got the paintbrush, we've got the eraser, clone, fill, gradient, we've got dodge and burn, we've got the sharpen, contrast, blur, and smudge. So we also have some ability to manipulate the layers here. Okay, so moving and rotating and scaling. We've got some color settings here. We've got our brush settings. Okay, we'll be using those a lot. We've got some brush images so that if we wanted to use one of these color presets or mask presets to create some different brush effects, we can use those. Also under options, we have the ability to pick the map that we're going to be painting on. If we've got an existing map we want to paint on, depending on what channel we want to paint on, we can select that here. Under paint behavior, we have a number of different options, including mirroring, which will allow us to paint on both sides at the same time. We've also got some randomized functionality, or if we want to create some kind of randomized surface effects, we can use those along with our brush. So a lot of options in here, a lot of settings that we can utilize. So let's say let's kind of keep it simple here, and let's say that we want to create a texture that has kind of a custom panel layout. So we have the panels on the other pieces that were created by our procedural map, but this time we want to actually paint our own. So let's start by creating a new texture. So we'll go to our paintbrush. It's going to ask us which channel do we want to paint on. So we would like to paint on the diffuse color. So it'll bring up the create texture dialog here. We can choose the size of the texture that we want. I'm going to choose something a little bit larger because we're going to be making these thin lines. I don't want to be pixelated. We can choose a color, and for the base color I'm going to go ahead and choose to make this a little bit closer to white. Okay, we can choose where we want to save this, and so I'll just go ahead and save it into our Scene Assets Images, and we can just call this Cockpit Panels, save it as a JPEG, and say OK. We'll go ahead and overwrite that, and we'll say OK, and then we're ready to start painting. Now it's going to automatically bring up our Layers dialog, which you can also activate here. And so here we can see that we have a very familiar layer dialog here. If you've done any sort of editing in Photoshop or something like that, where you've got layers, you've got the ability to add layers, delete layers, and so we can work with layers in here in addition to just painting a single map. We can also go ahead and save this as a PSD file with all the layers intact. We also have options here for adjusting our layers, so brightness, hue, saturation, levels, color balance, things like that. We've also got the blend modes here as well as the opacity, and then some other options here for our filters, whether we want to blur this and so forth. So a lot of different options, a lot of functionality, which we're not going to really have time to go into in this course, but we just want to be able to use it and get used to it a little bit. So we'll stay on the background layer here, and I'm actually going to close this out. So to actually paint, you can see a preview of our brush is happening right here on the side here. And so what we can do to change our brush, how our brush is applied, we can use the brush settings. By changing that, we can change those. We can also start to use some key combinations. So by holding down Control and Shift and dragging, we can change the brush radius. So you can see how I can interactively change that. Shift and Alt will change the opacity. Okay, and then Control and Alt will change the hardness. So I want to make sure I've got a nice hard edge there. And then I want to change the brush size down. So dial that hardness up quite a bit, and I want to change that brush size down, so maybe 2 or 3 on the radius. Now I also want the panels that I draw on this side to be mirrored to the other side, so I'm going to go into the Paint Behavior rollout, choose Mirroring in the X, and now you can see that we actually get a preview on the other side as we drag of where that's going to actually paint. So the actual panels that we paint aren't really important, so feel free to kind of use your own imagination to add something in. I'm just going to go ahead and start by just drawing in some simple shapes here along the side. Maybe adding a little bit right in there. Let's come in the back, and you can see how that's drawn that over on the other side. I'm going to come in the back and just create kind of an angled line coming down here and just have a little fun with it. So I'll come in and let's maybe create another shape kind of like that to kind of mirror that door shape, and then up here I'll pull this out and drag that down. So something like that, and you can see how that's mirrored over the other side. You can see we're getting some of that over here, but that's because these UVs are taking up that next tile basically, but it's not, the material is not going to be applied to those, so we don't need to worry about that. All right, so once we've got our texture map, we go ahead and click on the paint tool, and it's going to go ahead and save that out. So that if we go into our material editor, take a look at this map, you can see right here is the map that we saved. If we view it, you can see that that has the detail that we just painted. Okay, so in this case, we just kind of use this material as an example. You could use your existing materials and existing maps as well. But now that we have this, I'm going to go ahead and grab the image and just move it over, and I want to start to bring it in and combine it here with the materials that we currently have. So let me get back with our multi-sub-object here and assign that. So we got that base material back on here. Now we have this map that we can use that we just painted with the viewport canvas. I'm going to go ahead and just undock this. Okay, and so I want to kind of combine this with kind of a mottled red color. And right now we have noise applied to the specular, but I want to also get some noise for the color. So let's go ahead and get a noise map. Okay, so I'm going to get a noise map. Let's go into that map, and into the color, I'm going to actually sample some of this dark red. Okay, and then the light color, let's go ahead and just sample some of this lighter red up here. And so we end up with something like this. Let's change the scale of this. So make it a bit larger. Let's get a composite node here. Okay. And now in our composite, let's go ahead and add a new layer. All right, and so layer 1 is going to be on the bottom, so we'll go ahead and add the color there. And let's add the new lines that we just drew into the top here. Let's go ahead and change our blend mode to multiply. So it's going to multiply over the color that we have here. All right, let's quickly take a render and see what that looks like. So we'll just render that up. And we want to make sure that we again apply that back into our diffuse and then render that. And so there we can see that those lines applied over that red color. We can dial in the opacity, so changing that opacity. We'll dial that down a little bit. I also want to use a copy of this for the bump, so I'll just go ahead and hold down Shift and drag that out. Let's pipe this directly into the bump, again, of our red material. See how that looks. I'll go ahead and render that up. So now we've got a bump associated with that along with the color. And we can dial this in if we want to change the noise here. We can get these colors a little bit closer together, possibly. If we want to go ahead and grab that, and then we can maybe just lighten that up a little bit, desaturate it, lighten it up slightly, and maybe change the scale of this a bit. Okay, we can also take the bump value down by going into maps, taking that bump value down, and just re-render that. Okay, and so now we get the raised bump, or the depending on how you look at it, the lowered bump as well as the color inside there. Okay, so we can also go in, and if we want to paint texture for kind of dirt or grime along here, we can do that as well. And on the engine, maybe on the outer engine, we'd want to do that also. Okay, so that's a quick look at using the viewport canvas. Just keep that in mind, that you're able to now paint on your 3D models and get some textures created here very quickly. So we're almost done. In the next lesson, let's take a look at adding a glow to some of the materials that we're using. So adding a glow to portions of our pod racer. So we'll take a look at that in the next lesson.